There's hardly anyone who hasn't heard of the Titanic, not only because of its greatness and beauty, but mostly because of its tragic ending. However, there are some things you definitely didn't know about the Titanic, and they are so incredible that you just need to know them. Number 1. The largest moving object ever built. The Titanic was not only the largest ship to set sail at the time, but also the largest moving object built up to that period. When it was built in 1909, it was 882 feet and 9 inches long and 141 feet high, measuring from the waterline to the top of the funnels, and it resembled a floating city. It was so big that the New Yorkers worried about where and how they would dock once they reached their port. In comparison to the other ships built in the early 20th century, the greatness of the Titanic was impossible to imagine. The largest cruise ships of today, the Royal Caribbean's Oasis of the Seas and Allure of the Seas, are both 1,187 feet in length and 213 feet above the waterline, which is not that big in comparison to the Titanic that was built a century ago. Number 2. One of the Titanic's smokestacks was fake. Even though there were 4 smokestacks on the Titanic, only 3 of them were functional, meaning they were connected to the furnaces that produced smoke. The 4th funnel was placed on the ship to make it look more symmetrical and beautiful, but it also served as a kitchen ventilation shaft. Number 3. The interior was based on the world-famous Ritz Hotel. The designers of the Titanic must have liked the interior of the Ritz Hotel and thought it would leave the best impression on their passengers because they used it as a model for their cabins, especially the first-class cabins which were designed in the Empire style. They probably aimed at making a floating hotel of the finest kind and wanted the passengers to forget they were on a ship. Number 4. The Titanic Museum in Belfast has the same capacity as the actual Titanic. In the town of its origin, Belfast, exists one of the best museums in Ireland, the Titanic Belfast Museum. Incredibly enough, it has the capacity of 3,547 visitors at a time, which is the same number of passengers that could board the Titanic. A coincidence, you may think? I don't think so. Number 5. A novel predicted the Titanic sinking 14 years before its launch. Morgan Robertson, an American writer, wrote a novella titled The Wreck of the Titan in 1898. The novella is about a made-up ocean liner described as unsinkable, which interestingly enough had an insufficient number of lifeboats. The ship later collides with an iceberg and sinks. Did Robertson know something nobody else did? Number 6. There was a closer ship that could have saved more people. As if it were destined for the Titanic to suffer such a tragic fate, there was a ship which was closer to the Titanic's sinking location than the Carpathia which came to the rescue. The ship's name was the Californian, and she didn't respond to the Titanic's distress signals until it was too late. Crew members from the Californian saw the lights which the Titanic was sending in desperate need of assistance in the sky at 12:45 a.m. on April 15, 1912. They woke up the captain right away, but unfortunately, the captain took no action. Namely, it was too late and the wireless operator had gone to sleep. So the ship didn't pick up the Titanic's distress signals until the morning when Carpathia had already picked up as many survivors as she could. There were inquiries about this incident and it was concluded that the Californian could have saved almost everyone who was on board the Titanic had she acted as soon as seeing the flares in the night sky. The US Senate inquiry criticized the captain and deemed his inaction a bad call. Number 7. No one knows all who died on the Titanic. There were 2,208 passengers on board the Titanic, out of which only 705 survived. Even though the official number of lost lives was 1,503, there are over 100 unidentified bodies buried in Fairview Lawn Cemetery in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Many people used false names and traveled from various different places, which made identification of the recovered bodies quite difficult. Thanks to extensive DNA tests, a 19-month-old boy was identified in 2008, which is mind-blowing. Number 8. A drunk guy was one of the only survivors. Instead of panicking, which was what most of the passengers started doing after the ship hit the iceberg, Charles Jochen, the chief baker on the ship, started drinking as much whiskey as he could. Many assume that he tried to prepare his body for the cold water, or perhaps he just enjoyed the taste of the liquid and wanted it to be the last thing on his lips. Whatever his decision was, he was one of the few who survived. Having drunk enough, he started tossing chairs in the water and eventually spent several hours in the freezing cold water aboard one of them before he was rescued. Was he simply lucky, or did alcohol have anything to do with it? Number 9. The famous violin played on board the Titanic was rescued from the sea. Even though its heroic player Wallace Hartley died with the other victims as the ship went down, his violin was discovered in a woman's attic in 2006. Miraculously enough, after a series of tests, it was proven that it was the actual violin played on board the Titanic as it went down. Nowadays, it's a collector's piece. It was sold for £900,000 in 2013 to a private owner. Number 10. You can have a pint in the room where the Titanic was drawn up. Next door to the Titanic Belfast Museum, there's a luxurious hotel called the Titanic Belfast Hotel, located in the former headquarters where the Titanic was designed. In it, there is a room called the Drawing Office 2, which is a vibrant heart of the hotel with its 3-story-high barrel-vaulted ceiling. There, in the room the Titanic was designed, you can have a drink or grab a quick meal. You can also spend the night at the hotel, which is definitely a breathtaking experience. I bet you didn't know you can do that, right?